You make coffee? Nice. Everybody loves two scoops. How's your kids doing? Good. That's Scott. Who is? Your mom? Yes, she is. Yes. Your dad's been back the whole time last week. Yeah, they got back. They'll do it like, they'll leave like Friday after work, Thursday after work, so it's really not that bad. They just get it, midnight. They have like Saturday, Sunday. Yeah. You wish you got paid vacation. I think that would be good. No kids, great job. Give them to me and I'll pay You have 6 hours. I have a brother and sister. The youngest of them all. I like your shoes. Thank you. I like these leopard print outfits too. Yeah. My pants, nice shirt. We got Jackie in that shirt as well. Yeah, looks pretty nice. But he's on. Yeah, they're gonna be I love that. And office buildings too. I don't know if I ever liked them. I don't think I ever liked her until these matches. They're good. I was in Sparks. I passed it in just a few hours. You just got your shirt.
All right. There we go. Are we up? There we go. All right. All right. Well, as you can see, things are a little bit different this morning. A little after our worship this morning, we have young people that did LTC projects, display or showcase, or I can't think of the right word. They've been working on. So I'll talk a little bit more about that when the time comes. All right, so we are winding down here in the book of Acts. We're approaching the end. We're in chapter 24. I believe there's 28 chapters in the book of Acts. And so we're winding down here. So let's go ahead and start out with a prayer. Father, as we begin this morning with our study, Father, we are looking forward to the word that you have for us. Father, we thank you for your patience. We thank you for your faithfulness. We thank you for the plan which you have never deviated from, for your redemption and for the hope that you give to us. And Father, as we read this morning, we know we will be instructed and encouraged. And Father, for that we thank you. And we thank you in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. All right, so we are in Acts chapter 24. When we ended last time, Paul had been in Jerusalem, and a mob started. They wanted to have Paul put to death. The commander went and gathered them up, tried to find out what was going on, and he couldn't. Safety was an issue, so he wound up transferring Paul all the way down to Caesarea. And so the governor at the time there was Felix. And so let's go ahead and start reading chapter 24, beginning with the first verse. There we go. First 9 verses. All right. So 5 days later, the high priest Ananias went down to Caesarea with some of the elders and a lawyer named Tertullus, and they brought their charges against Paul before the governor. When Paul was called in, Tertullus presented his case before Felix. We have enjoyed a long period of peace under you, and your foresight has brought about reforms in this nation. Everywhere and in every way, most excellent Felix, we acknowledge this with profound gratitude. But in order not to weary you further, I would request that you be kind enough to hear us briefly. We have found this man to be a troublemaker, stirring up riots among the Jews all over the world. He is a ringleader of the Nazarene sect. He tried to desecrate the temple, so we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to learn the truth about all these charges we are bringing against him. The other Jews joined in the accusation, asserting that these things were true. All right. So you notice how they come down from Jerusalem. You look at the map, it looks like they're going up to Caesarea, right? But in Jewish geography, everything is down from Jerusalem. You always go up to Jerusalem, and you always come down from Jerusalem. So it's not a map thing. It's Jerusalem is the high place in their territory. So the high priest and a bunch of others come down, and they're going to try and make a case against Paul before the governor. And they bring somebody with them this time. Who is he? Tertullus, right? My Bible says he is a lawyer in the first verse. Anyone have a different translation other than lawyer? Spokesman. Okay, that's probably a little bit better, because when you hear lawyer, what do you think of? somebody who is versed in the law and expert on the law. And that's not exactly what this word here means. The word is, see, I circled it here in Greek, rheteros. Doesn't that sound like a word for rhetoric? Yeah. The word is, it refers to someone who is a professional orator. He is a professional speaker. His training is to help make a case and persuade people. And so they brought someone who's very good at speaking to bring a case against Paul. And notice how he begins his speech before Felix. Was that your reaction? The way he spends probably as much time, doing all of that as making the case, doesn't he? So, yeah, he's really laying it on thick here. And before we move on, I just want a few notes about Felix. Felix was a governor, but he was someone originally that was a slave, and he had become a freedman and kind of moved up the ranks and wound up becoming a governor. And he's held his post for about 5 years. And I know some of the things that Tertullus mentioned was there's been a period of peace, which is kind of interesting because from what we know from history is his tenure was marked by increasing violence and rebellion and insurrections. And he was brutal in putting them down. And I don't know, maybe that's what Tertullus was referring to. You've been very effective, even though they've been brutal, very effective at putting them down. He stamped them out ruthlessly in order to bring order. And maybe one of the reasons why he brought that up is like, okay, here you have another case of someone that's causing disorder, and so he's appealing to that. And another thing interesting, he calls him most excellent Felix. When you hear the word most excellent, what do you think of? The circus. Royalty, yeah. That phrase, most excellent, was a title that was reserved for members of the equestrian order in Roman society. It's a social class just beneath the senators. Felix didn't belong to that class. Remember, he was a slave that became a freedman and is now the governor. And so you're talking about sucking up, and that's exactly what it sounds like he's doing here. So. I believe he probably would have. I'm going to assume he was Roman. So, all right. And then he says, and then Tertullus says, "We are profoundly grateful to you, Felix." Now, from what you know about the Jewish attitude toward Rome, what's your reaction to that? Yeah. So. He could have bought his Roman citizenship. Yes. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Most of the information we know about Felix actually comes from a historian by the name of Josephus, and so that's where all this information came from. So, that was Annas. You talking about during the trial of Jesus? Yeah, that was Annas and Caiaphas. So. Oh, I don't know right offhand who would have been the high priest at that point when they brought Jesus to the temple. So I do know one thing: Roman governors oftentimes were the ones that appointed the high priest, and that's the reason why during the trial of Jesus you had both Annas and Caiaphas. They're both referred to as the high priest, but one of them was removed, and the other was I can't remember which is which, was appointed by Rome, and so one was it was a political thing. Yes. So, all right. So, this is sucking up to the point where it almost seems like it's a little embarrassing. At least to me, it's almost a little embarrassing. So, what 3 charges did Tertullus bring against Paul? Yes. No, yeah. There was a riot, and Paul was at the middle of it, and so he's the one at fault, even though he wasn't the one that caused the riot, right? So, said he defiled. Actually, notice it. Look at more closely at the way he worded that in verse 6. Yeah, didn't it kind of? Before they say he did, right, and now they're saying he tried to. Why the difference? Yeah, so they kind of had to tone that down a little bit, and so because once they started doing their cross-examination, they would have found out he never did these things. So he tried to. They could make that probably more easily make that case than he actually did, because there's no proof that he actually did. Remember, they accused him of bringing a Gentile into the inner courts of the temple, which never happened. So yeah, accused him of being a troublemaker, and also accused him of being a ringleader of the Nazarene sect. Who is the Nazarene sect? Yeah, they're referring to Jesus followers. Yeah, Christians. It's true that he is actually a leader among Christians, right? But when you say ringleader, what does that imply? Circus. Troublemaker. Yes. So this is a group of it suggests it's a group of like terrorist type of people. So, all right. On that. Okay. So, verse 10, Tertullus makes his case, and now Paul has his chance to defend himself. So, verse 10. When the governor motioned for him to speak, Paul replied, "I know that for a number of years you have been a judge over this nation, so I gladly make my defense. You can easily verify that no more than 12 days ago, I went up to Jerusalem to worship. My accusers did not find me arguing with anyone at the temple or stirring up the crowd in the synagogues or anywhere else in the city. And they cannot prove to you the charges they are now making against me. However, I admit that I worship the God of our ancestors as a follower of the way, which they call a sect. I believe everything that is in accordance with the law and that is written in the prophets. And I have the same hope in God as these men themselves have, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. So I strive always to keep my conscience clear before God and man. After an absence of several years, I came to Jerusalem to bring my people gifts for the poor and to present offerings. I was ceremonially clean when they found me in the temple courts doing this. There was no crowd with me, nor was I involved in any disturbance. But there are some Jews from the province of Asia who ought to be here before you and bring charges if they have anything against me. Or these who are here should state what crime they found in me when I stood before the Sanhedrin, unless it was this one thing I shouted as I stood in their presence. It is concerning the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you today." All right. So now it's Paul's turn. How does the way he addressed Felix stand in contrast to the way Tertullus addressed Felix? Right to the point, yeah. Yes. He could have done the same thing, right? Paul could have done the same thing Tertullus did, but he chooses not to do that sort of thing. So, what does that imply about Paul? He's straightforward. He doesn't need to do that, right? They're trying to suck up. Why would anyone try to suck up to somebody else in a situation like this? To get your way. Because you think that you may not have as strong a case as you think you do. And so you do everything you can to try and sway things your way. Paul doesn't do that because Paul knows they don't have any evidence of the charges they're bringing against him. And so at this point, Paul still has faith in the Roman justice system that he will be acquitted. So And so how did Paul defend himself? First of all, he starts off by saying, go ahead. Yeah. Yes, yes. I come from the same place that these guys do. We believe the same things. We have the same heritage, and so he makes that very clear. And you notice the first thing he does, it states his purpose for going to Jerusalem. His purpose in going to Jerusalem was to do what? To bring gifts, yeah, and to worship. I went to Jerusalem to worship, and I've been collecting gifts for people that are in need. I've been doing that for several years, and so that's why he was in Jerusalem, not to start a riot or anything like that. And so he went there. He didn't show up with a bunch of rabble or terrorists or anything like that. Paul, like I said, he freely admits about himself that he worships the God of their ancestors, the same God that these people that accuse him worship. He also mentions that he is a follower of what? The way, which they call a sect. And I think if the word for sect, I don't think it has the same connotation. The word heresy comes from the word that he uses there, but as sect. Anyway, they call it. That's what they call it. But he calls it the way. Why do you suppose they call themselves the way? In fact, you notice in the book of Acts, that's constantly how they refer. They were the way in the beginning. Yes, Jesus said, "I am the way." Yeah. So. And calling yourself the way, that it also implies that this is also all right. Yeah, to people know. Let's see. He has same hope as them, the resurrection of the dead. Let's see, what else did he mention there? I always strive for a clear conscience. And that's actually true. He's not exaggerating. He always, to the best of his ability, even if it was really hard, he did everything he could to do what he understood to be the right thing to do. See, he was ceremonially clean in the temple. Remember, he went through that whole process of going through that ritual with a bunch of others. And there was no crowd with him. Didn't cause any disturbance. It was the others that caused the disturbance. Remember, he was there in the temple, and there were some folks that were there from Asia, and they remembered him when he was in Asia, and said, "Look, this guy here is," and they started lobbing all these accusations against him, and that's where the riot started. Come help us get rid of this guy. So, yeah. So, if the accusation, he says, of being a troublemaker refers to what happened in Asia, what was Paul's response to that? If that's what they're referring to, the trouble that he caused in Asia, then where are the guys from Asia, right? They ought to be here accusing me. So we call that, what do we call that in the court of law? When someone says, well, so-and-so said such and such happened over there. Hearsay. Yeah, and that's not admissible, is it, in the court of law? So, what's that? Gossip, yeah. Yeah, those that are there should state what crime they found in him when he stood before the Sanhedrin. Remember, they had already arrested him in Jerusalem. He stood before the Sanhedrin. Okay, what crime is he guilty of when he was there? Of course, they didn't have anything. So, except for the accusation that he defiled the temple by bringing a Gentile into the inner courts, which they had no evidence of. He said there's the one thing that they might have a case on. And it's the one thing that he shouted in the Sanhedrin. And what did he shout in the Sanhedrin when he was there? Yeah, I am on trial for the resurrection of the dead. Now, the fact that he said he had to shout it suggests what about the Sanhedrin? Yeah, it was in turmoil. The Sanhedrin, and it was in turmoil. And so he had to raise his voice above everyone else. I'm on trial for the resurrection of the dead. So, all right, so that's basically Paul's defense. How would you evaluate his defense? What did he do well? What did he avoid? And so forth. What's your evaluation of his defense. Basically, what he did was just explain what he did and emphasize the point that the stuff they said he did, they had no evidence of. Okay? Yeah. Have you ever responded to a false accusation or innuendo or anything like that because of your faith before? Lots of times. Yeah. How did that go? Was it what have you found the best way to deal with that sort of thing is, and maybe the best way not to deal with it is? Approach it prayerfully. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You know, we say that, and sometimes we don't. You know, we say, well, you always ought to, before you react, you should always pray first, and we all agree with that. But oftentimes, what happens? You react, right? But what have you found happens if you pray first? It calms you. Yeah. Have you ever noticed that kind of help that adrenaline, that emotional reaction? Have you ever found that when you pray, that kind of sets that aside? You wind up being more clear-headed about it.
I wish I could remember where it was in Proverbs. You probably do, John. But the writer tells us a soft answer turns away wrath.
Yes, soft answer turns away wrath. Yeah. Yeah. Harsh answer stirs up strife. Yeah. Yes. Yes. And one thing we'll see throughout all this, Paul, this isn't the first time. Paul seems like he's going to be before several people. Nobody wants to release him, even though they find. And I think after a while, if this goes on for years, you kind of get agitated. But he winds up keeping us cool throughout the whole thing, throughout the whole ordeal. So. Oh yeah, we're getting that. So. All right. So let's continue. Verse 22. When Felix, who was well acquainted with the way, adjourned the proceedings. Then Felix, who was well acquainted with the way, adjourned the proceedings. And when Lysias the commander comes, he said, I will decide your case. He ordered the centurion to keep Paul under guard, but to give him some freedom and permit his friends to take care of his needs. Several days later, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish. He sent for Paul and listened to him as he spoke about faith in Christ Jesus. As Paul talked about righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid and said, that's enough for now. You may leave, and when I find it convenient, I will send for you. At the same time, he was hoping that Paul would offer him a bribe. So he sent for him frequently and talked with him. When 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus. But because Felix wanted to grant a favor to the Jews, he left Paul in prison. All right, so we know a little bit about Felix. By the way, and one of the things I failed to mention was bribes. According to Josephus, that was rather common with Felix. And that's the way a lot of people interact with him, is he accepted bribes from people. So, but now we're introduced to his wife, Drusilla. What do we know about Drusilla? She was Jewish, so he married a Jewish woman. Anyone know anything else about her? She's actually the youngest daughter of Herod Agrippa. And that was a Herod, you remember earlier in the book of Acts, the Herod that stood up and everyone said, God and not a man, and God struck him with worms and he died. She was his daughter, so she's part of the whole Herod family. What we know about her is that at 14, she was married to the king of one of the provinces of Syria for a while. Felix saw how beautiful she was, renowned for and had a reputation for being a beautiful young woman. And Felix hired a magician to convince her to leave her husband for Felix. And Felix actually promised her felicity. That's a kind of a play on his own name. Anybody know what the word felicity means? Happiness and joy and all that sort of stuff. And so Felix promised her felicity, and she wound up leaving her husband. Remember, she's just a Jewish lady. And what's the law say about that? The Jewish law say about that? The Torah. No, yeah, that's anyway. But that's what she did. She's now the third wife of Felix, and they had a son named Agrippa, who died in the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD. And so that's most of what we know about Drusilla. And so, and I kind of had to ask a question: why would Luke, in writing this account, include Drusilla in the text here? So here he's being tried by Felix. Paul's being tried by Felix, and he comes in, and with him is his wife, Drusilla. Why mention her in the text? And what's your reaction knowing that she's there during all of this?
Well, she would have influenced him in
Okay.
some way, shape, or form as his wife. Her being Jewish, she probably sided with the Jews of the time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, she would have been influential in that.
Yeah. So a lot of his acquaintance with familiarity with the beliefs and values of that region probably came from his wife, Drusilla. But do you think there's any irony, or I don't know if irony is the right word, the fact that he's standing in judgment over her with his wife Drusilla, and it's all about supposedly Paul breaking the law when what's going on with him and Drusilla. So, yeah. So I don't know if that's why Luke mentions it or not, but kind of interesting that this is mentioned. And so the fact that Felix is more interested in making money and taking bribes than in justice. So,
John,
yes.
wasn't a bribe pretty common at that time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
If you took a bribe, it was a promise.
Yep.
You couldn't go back on it.
Yeah. Well, you could, but usually there'd probably be a consequence for it down the road for going back. Yeah. So, unless you were someone that didn't have any recourse, I imagine that would have happened too, where somebody took a bribe, took your money, then didn't grant you what you were supposed to anyway. What are you going to do? I'm sure that happened too. So, so Paul is talking with Felix personally. What is Paul? He spends a lot of time not talking about his offense, but what does he talk about? Yeah, talked about Jesus. Notice he talked about righteousness. Okay, well, what is righteousness? Especially for a person that's in the position like Felix. What is righteousness?
Not taking bribes.
Not taking bribes, yeah, that's one thing. So doing the right thing. You're in a position where you're to decide the rightness or the wrongness of the cases that come before you. And so he talks about righteousness, and he also talks about self-control. Yeah, couldn't find anything wrong with it. You think he would have released him, but he didn't release him. Why didn't he release him? Yeah, he wanted to do a favor for the Jews. So, and he also talked about the judgment to come. Yeah, if you don't live righteously and don't do righteousness, if you don't control yourself, then there's the judgment to come. What was Felix's reaction to all of that? Yeah.
Felix was the guilty one.
Yes.
He was the one that was doing all
Yes.
of those things.
So you see the irony here? Who's standing in judgment against who? So, so yeah, he didn't want to hear that. He was afraid. And he was afraid because that stuff, all the stuff that Paul was talking about, I'm sure he knew that stuff was good and it was right, but it was very condemning of his own actions. So, he knew he was guilty. But he kind of kept Paul around because he wanted to do a favor for the Jews, and he was also hoping maybe to get a bribe from Paul, who's gonna, why do you suppose Paul never offered a bribe? Because if he had said, "Here, I'll give you a bribe," and Felix probably would have released him, and that would have been the end of that. But we don't see any indication that Paul ever offered him any kind of favor or bribe. Why do you suppose Paul never did that? Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So. Yeah. Why would you want to do that? Yeah. 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 That says something about his integrity, doesn't it? So.
I mean, that would also contradict everything you just talked about
Yes.
righteousness and
Yes.
self-control and
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah. So. And I know Paul is like, remember he said, I always try to do the right thing. I never violate my conscience. So he's not going to offer a bribe. I mean, that would have been the easy way out. 2 years go by, and what's your impression here so far of the Roman justice system now? They didn't find any charges that would stick. He's still in custody after 2 years. So. I know in our system, I think they have provisions for that, right? You can't do that. You can't just leave somebody open-ended in custody just forever without bringing a charge against them. So, what might you do if you spent 2 years in custody because of your faith in limbo? Don't know till you get there. Yeah. I know Paul. Go ahead. Yeah, this isn't right. And it's true, it isn't right. And I think Paul knew it wasn't right either, right? This isn't right. Yeah. You notice he's having, okay, well, who's here to listen to me? Felix. Okay, so he had these conversations with Felix. And we know at some point while he was in prison that a good portion of the New Testament letters we have, they were written when Paul was where? In prison. Yeah, so he didn't, even though he was in custody, he didn't stop his ministry, and he wasn't so focused on trying to be free that he forgot everything else that he was doing. So, all right. So 2 years go by, brings us to chapter 25. And now he's before Felix. Festus comes in and takes over the office that Felix had held. So we don't know a whole lot about Festus other than his tenure as the governor seems to have been much more peaceful than that of Felix. So I have a little note here to remember that when a new governor has arrived, remember that Jerusalem and Israel had a reputation for being a volatile place. And so when Festus arrives, he hits the ground running. He's stationed in Caesarea, and the first thing he does is he goes to Jerusalem. Okay, that's kind of the center of where all of the turmoil usually takes place. And so let's go and start reading chapter 25, verse 1. 3 days after arriving in the province, Festus went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and the Jewish leaders appeared before him and presented charges against Paul. They requested Festus, as a favor to them, to have Paul transferred to Jerusalem, for they were preparing an ambush to kill him along the way. Festus answered, Paul is being held at Caesarea, and I myself am going there soon. Let some of your leaders come with me, and if the man has done anything wrong, they can press charges against him there. After spending 8 to 10 days with them, Festus went down to Caesarea, and the next day he convened the court and ordered that Paul be brought before him. When Paul came in, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him. They brought many serious charges against him, but they could not prove them. Then Paul made his defense. I have done nothing wrong against the Jewish law or against the temple or against Caesar. Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there on these charges? Paul answered, I am now standing before Caesar's court, where I ought to be tried. I have not done anything wrong to the Jews, as you yourself know very well. If, however, I am guilty of doing anything deserving of death, I do not refuse to die. But if the charges brought against me by these Jews are not true, No one has the right to hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar." After Festus had conferred with his council, he declared, "You have appealed to Caesar. To Caesar you shall go." All right. And why do you suppose Festus didn't initially grant the request of the Jews to have Paul transferred back to Jerusalem? Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious, right? Pretty obvious. And so he gives Paul the choice, though. Do you want to go? I guess he kind of tried to nudge him in that way. So notice this time Luke doesn't give the details of the accusations. It's probably just the same things, sort of things that they said before. Maybe they've added some new things. But the problem was they didn't have any proof of the charges that were against him. And so Paul pointed out very emphatically that he did nothing wrong against, number one, the Jewish law, and didn't do anything wrong, number two, against the temple, and didn't do anything wrong, number three, against Caesar. Now, probably that last one, against Caesar, would have been the one that Festus would have been probably more interested in than the others. So what might Paul have been thinking and feeling as in regard to how Festus responded to the case here? What might Paul have been thinking or feeling in the way that Festus was responding to the case?
I think his perception would have been getting sent to Jerusalem was being returned to Moab or returned to
Yeah. And Festus didn't release him. Festus was nudging, pushing to have him go back to Jerusalem and to be tried there. Not before the Jewish council. He said, notice he said, "How do you feel about being tried before me there?" But he knew that that would not be favorable to himself if he had done that. You get the sense that maybe he's beginning to realize in Caesarea that he's not going to receive any justice there. I mean, he's already been in custody 2 years. Now we've switched governors, and we're going through this whole same scenario all over again. And it's because, obviously, Festus wanted to do the Jews a favor. Why would Festus want to do the Jews a favor? Keep them happy? Yeah, because when you don't keep them happy, what happens? Riots. Yeah, they're prone to riots there. And so it was purely a political move to try and keep everything smoothed over there. So, yes.
I see in here, after somebody's put away for 2 years, and most of it probably couldn't have heard very much about him, I wouldn't think. But after the 2-year period, they were still had a lot of anger.
Yeah.
Built.
Yep. I remember there was a group of 40 men that made a vow that they would kill him. I don't know if these people that were planning on to ambush him on the way were the same ones, but you got the same plot that's still in play here to have him put to death when they transferred him, if they transferred him. What's that? Yeah, I kind of wonder about that. So what happened? They made a vow they weren't going to eat or drink until he was dead. It's 2 years later, so yeah. All right. So Paul appeals to Caesar, which is kind of like appealing to the highest court in the land, right? And so he had the right to do that as a Roman citizen. So in verse 13, a few days later, King Agrippa, and by the way, this is the last Herodian king. This Agrippa would have been, this is Agrippa II, the Herod Agrippa that was killed or that died eaten with worms. This is his son. And Bernice, actually Bernike in Greek, that's his sister, by the way. They arrived at Caesarea to pay their respects to Festus. Since they were spending many days there, Festus discussed Paul's case with the king. And he said, "There is a man here whom Felix left as a prisoner. When I went to Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews brought charges against him and asked that he be condemned. I told them that it is not the Roman custom to hand over anyone before they have faced their accusers and have had an opportunity to defend themselves against the charges. When they came here with me, I did not delay the case, but convened the court the next day and ordered the man be brought in. When his accusers got up to speak, they did not charge him with any of the crimes I had expected. Instead, they had some points of dispute with him about their own religion and about a dead man named Jesus, whom Paul claimed was alive. I was at a loss to know. I was at a loss how to investigate such matters. So I asked if you would be willing to go to Jerusalem and stand trial there on these charges. But when Paul made his appeal to be held over for the emperor's decision, I ordered him to be held until I could send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear this man myself. He replied, tomorrow you will hear him. All right, so Agrippa the second is now a king over that region. And it says, when you read the text, it says Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea. You kind of assume what about them? That they're married, right? But anyone that lived during that time would know that the two of them are not married. Just brother and sister together. Does anyone know any? Bernice, by the way, is a daughter both of these are a part of the Herodian family. Anyone know anything about Bernice? By any chance? Okay. Someone said this would have made a good soap opera or a good movie, if somebody said before. But when she was 13 years old, she was married to her uncle, Herod of Challis. He died, so she moved in with her brother, Herod Agrippa II. He was now the new ruler in that area. Then he gained some more territory. She later married King Polemon of Cilicia. They divorced, and she went back to Agrippa, and she lived a good portion of her life with her brother. And according to Josephus, there was a rumor floating around that the two of them had been having an incestuous relationship with each other. And so she was the mistress of Titus at one point, and he wound up. It wasn't politically advantageous for him to be connected with her, so he got rid of her. She goes back to Agrippa once again. So anyway, so Luke mentions Agrippa and Bernice. You know, what do you know? What's your impression of the whole Herodian family, the Herods? Yeah, I see you shaking your head. So yeah, it's one big drama, right? And that's the sort of thing that happens with the Herods generation after generation. But he's the king, and Festus is a new governor, and so he's not quite sure what to do in this case. So he confers with Agrippa, the king, because Paul has appealed to Caesar. And what's the issue with this? Paul appealing to Caesar and him going to the emperor. Yeah. So what charges are against him? Okay, if he's appealed to Caesar on what charges? And so there's not even a clear charge against him of what he's guilty of. That it would have to be sent to Caesar. And so they're going to find out later on, since there's no charges against him that hold any muster, he could have just been set free. But I find that kind of interesting too, when Agrippa and Festus said, well, he could have been set free. I don't think it would have been set free. He's already been in custody 2 years, and the pattern seems to be we're going to hang on for either a bribe and we're out of time, or a bribe or to make to. All right, so we'll stop with that, and we'll look at the rest of the chapter is Paul's defense before Agrippa. And it's the longest text of his defense that we have here, and so we'll look at that more closely next time and move on. All right, let's close out with a quick prayer. Father, thank you so much for this message. Father, may we be encouraged by it, and Father, we thank you in the name of your Son Jesus. Amen.